Hello, this is the channel that is often imitated but is never duplicated. I'm James Barfield, and today we have the honor of having a friend of mine and a talented individual by the name of Patrick Woods. And Patrick, basically, he and I first met back in about 2003 when we were both working on the campaign for Mr. Donald Betts, who was running for state senator at that time. And Mr. Woods was campaign manager for Mr. Betts, and that's how we became acquainted. Mr. Woods, introduce yourself and tell us basically what you've been doing since the time you arrived in Wichita, and I believe you came here and enrolled in Friends University.
I did, yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Barfield. First of all, I want to thank you for having me. I got to say, a pleasure to be with you, even if by Zoom. And
Yeah.
I appreciate the opportunity to talk about Wichita just because Wichita really represents one of those significant inflection points for me in my life. And if I were being honest, I would call it a turning point.
Okay.
Probably where I started to, I first began to come into my own identity. By that, I mean that never-ending process of where, a person starts to observe and study the world as it is, think about the distance between where the world is and where it should be, and think about themselves, their place in that world. And once that process begins, usually one can start to, formulate their own, niche that they think they can play in closing that gap or their contribution to, closing the gap between the present world and a just world. So it all happened for me really when I was in Wichita and studying at Friends University, as you mentioned, on my own, probably for the first time in my real life.
Excuse me, go ahead.
No, go ahead. I'm sorry.
No. Okay, so, and one thing I did forget to mention, I do want to mention that you and I both served together on the Kansas African American Affairs Commission for a couple of years together. And I did want to get that in.
Yeah.
Now, so once you left Friends University, that is when you first got involved with Mr. Betts, is that correct?
Well, yeah, so at Friends, he and I were oftentimes classmates. We were both studying political science and history. He was a couple of years older than me, so he graduated before me. But as a couple of years older than me, I got a chance to be involved in some of his, things where he decided he was going to step forward and exert leadership. He ran for student body president there at Friends University and was victorious and exercised a lot of very important leadership on the in the Student Government Association. I ran for a Senate position and was a senator, and then I ran for the position of Senate Speaker. So it was my job to preside over the Senate during that time. So we had a lot of opportunities to work together. Then when he decided to run for a state house seat, I got a chance to volunteer on his campaign. I didn't run it. When he decided to run for state Senate seat, then he called me and asked me, actually, will you help me kind of put things together? And since we knew each other very well, I'd worked on all his other campaigns. We had the opportunity to do something really special and elect somebody I thought who, was in it for all the right reasons, was still a dreamer, still had a, high ambitious plans for the things that he could accomplish on behalf of his district once elected. So we put together a campaign that initially was a campaign to replace a retiring senator, the long-serving Senator Rip Gooch, who held that seat. Had retired, had stepped down before his term ended, and so someone had to replace him and serve out the last year of his term. And so the first campaign actually was just among precinct committee people. So whole different kind of thing. It's really intense, but it's really short. You got a few weeks to try to round up enough votes for committee people to be selected. And we had a really, significant challenge because we had top tier candidates who were also vying for that. A current state representative, he eventually pulled himself out of the running, but then also a current, at that time, city council member, very popular and very successful, effective on the council, Carl Brewer. He'd gone to serve 2 terms as mayor of Wichita. Donald was successful and became Senator Betts. And then in the 2004 election, I got to run more of a conventional campaign in which, we were organizing volunteers and had a big significant ground game, had a fundraising apparatus, and had to, have a message campaign and direct contact campaign put together. I came in contact during a couple of fundraisers that we organized for the senator with the governor's office, Governor Sebelius, and she made an appearance at one of the fundraisers for us. I also got a chance to work very, closely with many of the state representatives, candidates for the office of state representative that were within the Senate district that Senator Betts was representing in the 29th Senate district. So I got to know them very well and got to, actually help out quite a bit with some of their campaigns. So after the election was over, since I'd worked closely with those folks, and I also got a chance to work pretty closely with the governor's office, Governor Sebelius then hired me to work on her staff as a member of the governmental affairs and policy team. And I worked as the GEPA, as I used to call it, the governor's education policy advisor. It's funny, I started working on, I want to say, a Monday, and the Friday before that Monday, being the governor's education policy advisor, the Kansas Supreme Court issues an order stating that the state school finance formula constitution that the legislature had passed was unconstitutional, and that they would join the entire formula before August, unless the legislature were to come back and fix it before August, meaning a session would be in short order. And the governor would need to call the special session, meet with legislative leaders, put together a plan that, the 4 of them could vote for and that she could sign, and she'd need to exercise all this leadership within, a couple of weeks. And so that was kind of the baptism by fire. And then lucky for me, there were so many incredible people that I got a chance to work with that were on that team. The governor, of course, obviously being elected twice, being elected 4 times statewide, and served 10 years as a state representative before that. Totally in it for the right reasons, state budget, back and forth, understood school finance. So we were able to put together a school finance package that, in the special session allocated $300 million additional dollars to K-12, and the big critical piece of it, which actually satisfied the equity concerns that the court laid out, was that the bulk of the money was actually targeted where it needed to go, where the most risk was. There was almost a 1-to-1 correlation between students who lived in poverty and students who were at risk of failing. So for funding purposes, since you need to appropriate the money ahead of time, you need a proxy measure for what's going to be the most accurate proxy for students who are going to be at risk. There was almost a 1-to-1 correlation with poverty, so they based it on poverty, and we were able to build a new school finance formula that not only allocated adequate money at the base, so everyone had enough money to educate their students, but it actually compensated for students who faced additional challenges. And it did force school districts to lean heavily on their local tax base, which we know is totally, unequal
Right. Absolutely.
and inequitable in every way, all
Mhm.
the state. So with that $300 million, and then in the next legislative session, we passed another $500 million school finance package. You had almost $1 billion new dollars over those two sessions go into public education. And the governor managed to do it, without raising taxes. She did it by, selling the state motor pool, by refinancing, state debt with more favorable rates, and saving taxpayer money that way, by putting timers in the state office building so the lights would go off, and sensors so the lights would go off when people weren't there.
Right.
Everything from rationing the number of paper clips
Yeah.
you could imagine. So that was a really exhilarating time to be in public service, because you got to see a lot of really good things happen, not just for the state budget, but in my case, the areas I was passionate about, in public education and investing in human capital and doing it where it needed to happen.
Right.
In our case, and you and I fought this battle often at the commission, we know that poverty in this country, unfortunately, correlates so closely, almost 1-to-1 with race. So the folks who end up on the bottom, losing into those disparities, typically are Black and brown students, primarily Black. So this meant that we were actually erasing or working to roll back some of these inequities that had been sewed into the way we educated students years and years and years and years before.
Sure. Now, Sebelius, speaking of Sebelius, she was a very popular politician and a very popular governor, so popular, in fact, that she was recruited to work in the Obama campaign, or not campaign, but his administration. But let me ask you this. Now, staying in politics just for the moment. After your tenure with the Sebelius, administration, was that the time that you yourself decided to get into politics in a big way and run for a school board in Topeka?
Yeah, so it was. The majority of my young life had always been thinking, hey, if we could just fix some of these, if we had some kind of formulaic way to account for, the inequity that and the disparities that really are foundational elements in our country. I mean, people don't like to think of that, but if we're honest with ourselves, race and racism has been the social organizing principle for the society since,
the beginning of time, almost.
Yeah, since the early days when Europeans landed here and recognized their way of stratifying society so they could be able and they could know who was going to do what job, and treated the element was race that they used.
Right.
So, my thought was, okay, if we can't go back in time and undo that, if we can try to, compensate where we fight those foundational elements with, tools to try to mitigate the effects, whether it be, additional funds that are formulaically imposed so they try to, mitigate some of the effects of them. That's one way. So in working in state government, I thought, okay, we'll get this bill passed, things will be great. Well, I found out once we, appropriated the $1 billion new dollars into public education, that was as far as the state's authority really went to determine, how it was going to be spent. It was up to local school boards to make the determination at that point how they were going to spend it. When, the district that I lived in, Topeka, which is a minority majority district, was going to be getting a significant amount of this money, just like Wichita public schools. These are the times in which, if you're going to try to right some of these historical wrongs and peel back some of these old, inequities that date back hundreds of years, you invest in things like, high quality early childhood education. So you can try to level the playing field before students start. So you won't have that big gap that's really an opportunity gap in terms of who gets chances to learn before kids even get to school. Invest in things like trying to turn, a dual language program, trying to turn what some of the cynics think is a disadvantage in the sense that, students come to school where their first language may not be English.
Right.
Turning that on its head, using it as an advantage, meaning we live in an interdependent, globalized world. Why not leverage the other languages that students bring to the campus with them and teach people to be bilingual, biliterate, interculturally competent, and able to compete in this global market.
Right.
Those are things you do when you're getting a big infusion of cash. So I thought, if I really want to see those things happening, why not toss my hat in the ring and try to see if I can influence the way things happen? And, just so happened to be lucky enough that the people at Topeka decided to elect me.
Okay. Now, did you serve 1 term or 2 terms?
I served 3.
3 terms. Okay.
Yeah. So I served 12 and a half years on the Topeka Public Schools Board of Education. 6 of those years I served as president, a couple of years as vice president. Had a chance to hire a lot of talented superintendents to see through some of the things that I wanted to see accomplished when I first got elected. Working with the really awesome board members I got a chance to work with, we, passed a $142 million bond initiative with no tax increase. We're able to build a new preschool and universalize early childhood education across Topeka Public Schools footprint. We were able to, create a new 2 immersion dual language magnet school where we equip students to be bilingual, biliterate, interculturally competent students. It goes all the way from elementary school up to into our comprehensive high school, our biggest comprehensive high school. Then, we were able to upgrade our facilities in terms of safety. We were able to take out some of the inequities that had existed, where schools on certain side of town, had facilities that looked a certain way versus, other sides of town.
Sure.
So, I also got a chance to serve on the, board for the State Association of School Boards and serve as the president of that board. So I got a chance to make my voice heard more in the State House. And be a part of some of the significant things that happened. I will admit that a lot of that service happened during this very long recession that we had that started in February of 2008 when the bottom got everything. And then, we didn't fully climb out of it until about 2015 or so. Many people would argue we haven't fully climbed out of it yet. But in terms of having to make cuts, to public budgets, that's about when we started to climb out. So I had a wonderful opportunity to be a part of a lot of really exciting things.
Okay. Now, when you left, well, I won't say left the school, but after your last tenure there, you were employed by WestStar, I believe now, which is now Evergy. Was that your first job after leaving the school board or KU?
Did you so I when I was working in Wichita running Don's campaigns, Senator Betts' campaigns, I was working at Friends University doing admissions counseling and working with students there in Wichita. Mentioned I went to work for Governor Sebelius, worked in the administration until the end of that administration. Then I took a job as a director of external affairs at KU in the College of Arts and Sciences, where I had gotten my graduate degree. And after KU, I left KU in 2014 to go work at WestStar in a job that they had created. And this actually, it's an interesting story how we became acquainted with each other. So Evergy at the time, WestStar, really had a significant interest in workforce development, and they wanted to do it. They wanted to expand their talent pool by including more diversity in it, by diversifying.
Mm-hmm.
They could see when they looked at the future of Kansas workers, and they could see increasing diversity is basically what was driving the increase in numbers of workers that be available. Mm-hmm. So I was the director of talent management and diversity, and my job was to try to establish, relationships with high schools and community colleges and universities that gave the students and the institutions access to valuable kind of career learning opportunities and valuable application of the things they were learning in the classroom. And it also gave the company valuable access to talented students that it could hire, bring on in job shadows or internships, or eventually hire as full-time employees. So for me, that was a really exciting thing, having worked, for at the time, I think 10 years on my local school board to try to get our students prepared to step into some of these high quality, jobs that are really needed and don't go away, can't be outsourced. So currently I work, I guess I should say, when I left WestStar or Evergy, it had already converted to Evergy in 2018. While working there, I became interested in kind of the regulatory affairs area. Mm-hmm. So at a utility like that, regulatory affairs really means not just what you would think, staying in compliance with regulations, but for a regulated utility, it means how you get paid.
Okay.
What? To me, that I view that as kind of analogous to the legislative, functions of school finance. Who is getting what and when and who's paying. Right. So an opportunity to work in regulatory affairs and transmission, the interstate commerce part of electricity, that came open at ITC Great Plains, which is the nation's largest independent transmission company. So I decided to jump to make that, take that opportunity and get a chance to work in the regulatory field and work with our regulators on, just and reasonable rates and certification and siting and all the things that they care about.
So let me ask you one question. What year did you leave WestStar?
2018.
2018. Did you have any part to play in the installation of these monstrosities poles in Wichita?
I did not. No, I was actually in the HR department. And so the folks who made those decisions, in the transmission, department, I don't know. I wasn't in that department. I wasn't consulted, have no real clue. So I probably shouldn't even opine or, throw any, try to imagine what they might have been thinking. My thought, what they probably were thinking is they were probably looking at what is the most reliable structure for the least cost. And they were probably doing it with good intentions, I hope, and thinking that, let's make sure we have the structure that's gonna not fail, so we don't have to go in these communities and leave them without electricity and go in and try to fix things. And let's do it in a way that won't raise customer rates or raise them at the least possible. And the company itself now, of course, has said that they, made that was bad judgment, and they regret the decisions.
Regardless of what their motive was for doing that, the problem I have is the lack of communications between Evergy and the communities that were going to be affected by this. These people had no say so. They knew nothing about this until the polls were going up. And I think, there was a miscommunication, a lack of communications, whatever you want to call it. And it created some very, very bad feelings toward Evergy in this community. You know. Okay, so then you leave there, and did you go? Where did you go to work after that? After everything?
At ITC Great Plains.
Okay, and that's where you currently are employed.
Yes, sir.
And what do you do there? What's your title there?
I'm the manager of regulatory affairs and strategy. So my job is to manage the company's relationships with our state regulators. Okay. So the Corporation Commission and the personnel that work there, the Oklahoma Corporation Commission, where we've got assets also, and then regulators within the Southwest Power Pools coverage territory, which is basically a 14-state strip in the midsection of the country that goes from, the Dakotas all the way down to North Texas. So their regulators there in that regional transmission organization get to make decisions about cost allocation. So who pays for what when big regional grid projects are built. So those are big decisions because they have implications for what will be built. Mm-hmm. People in one state don't want to pay for something that they don't feel like they're going to get benefits off of. Right. It's going to be built in another state.
Understandable.
So it's important in that way. There are also equity concerns because people who may live in a certain area may have the majority of power plants, whether they be renewable energy facilities or old traditional fossil fuel power plants located close to them. And the people who are consuming a lot of energy, maybe mm-hmm. somewhere far away, you wouldn't want these people to pay a disproportionate share for transmission service for those sources and these people. So there are all kinds of fun debates we get to watch the commissioners have, and that we get to inform and advise on.
Now, is this company a multi-state company?
It is. So ITC has assets in Michigan and Iowa and Minnesota and Kansas and Oklahoma, and I think a little bit in Missouri. Okay. Our parent company actually has, assets, even though we don't, we have zero connection to any of these assets that the parent company holds, but it's actually located in Canada, and it's got other assets in, Caribbean and Central America.
Okay. So I have to ask you this. You're still a young man.
I like to think so.
You spend a lot of time in politics. So I have to ask you, is there a future in politics in the life of Patrick Woods?
I don't know. I never say never. I have to admit, being gone from being directly in the political world right now, actually, with as hyper partisan and divisive as it has become, mm-hmm. And as sharp elbowed as it's become, it doesn't really make me lament the fact that I'm not directly in it all the time. Mm-hmm. But I will say, I'm certainly inspired when I see talented leaders who are able to use their abilities to do great things for their communities. So just right where you are in Wichita, you've got Brandon Johnson, who just mm-hmm. got reelected to the council. I think your mayor is doing a phenomenal job. You've got all kinds of elected officials who are able to use their abilities to achieve things.
Sure.
People in the community. That's always inspiring. But in the immediate future, I don't know. I can't.
Well, it's part of that because of the fact that since you left politics, it has become so partisan. Yeah. And there's a reluctance, especially on the federal level, of willingness to work together for the good of the country. It's all about party now.
Totally agree. It's all party, and even just within, you may have within a party 2 or 3 individuals who, may really want something for their
Mhm.
state. And it seems really difficult to get people to work together. I don't know if maybe I thought maybe I, as a young person, was romanticizing the, reading Robert Caro's Master of the Senate and looking at how Lyndon Johnson was able to work with people
Yeah.
from all sides and
Yeah.
get things done. But maybe I'm not romanticizing that. Maybe it's just really how bad things have become.
Yes, yes. Yeah, it's a whole different world of politics now than what it was when Lyndon Johnson was president.
Yeah.
or even when Bill Clinton was president.
True.
So,
True.
well, listen, man, it's been a pleasure having you, and I've enjoyed your conversation. And I think that will give the folks here in Wichita an opportunity to catch up on where Patrick Woods has been for the last 10 to 15 years. So,
Yeah, well, thank you. It's my pleasure.
and I appreciate your taking the time out of your very busy schedule to join me today. And I look forward to talking with you at a future date, sir. So, well,
I'll hold you to it.
All righty. Look forward to it. Okay, and that's it. And we'll see you next time.
Thank you.
Program is brought to you by the Kansas City Business Association.